Hi, so today we have Luca with us. Hi, Luca.
How's it going?
Luca has a personal interest in AI. So again, a slightly different topic, kind of a crossroads between computer science and philosophy. So philosophy is the bit that I bring to the conversation that I'm interested in, but you have got a computer science degree and kind of work in the sector. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Perfect. So do you want to tell us a bit about how you got into AI, how you got interested in it, and kind of your journey with AI so far?
Sure, yeah. So basically, I was doing a degree in Edinburgh, just a regular computer science degree. And in my own time, I was, again, just thinking really what I wanted to do with my life in the future, what sort of area in computer science I wanted to focus on. So a lot of my personal time went into reading about AI. I was particularly interested on AI just from the usual watching movies and all of those things when I was growing up. And basically, I started reading blogs and I started reading books, mostly in the space of long-term consequences of AI. So I'm talking Nick Bostrom, Elisa Yudkowsky, that sort of people.
We're going to link them below if you're interested.
Yeah. So and Ray Kurzweil as well, The Singularity is Near. So this sort of area of, let's say, ethics of AI, mostly concern itself with what will happen in the future if we don't do certain things correctly now to bring about, say, really smart AI or super intelligent AI. And this is very far from what I currently do. This is very far from what pretty much most AI is doing at the moment. It's definitely not the prevalent field, but people like Nick Bostrom and Elisa Yudkowsky obviously justify the reasons why they should sort of already start thinking about these questions due to the nature of how catastrophic something like superhuman AI could be to us.
So when you first got into it and you started sort of studying that at university, so you went to Edinburgh University, right? Were you mostly kind of interested in how amazing and progressive AI was and all the kind of incredible things that it could do for humanity? So it started with the positives of AI, right? And kind of that being the most progressive, the fastest growing field there is in the world, as far as I understand.
Yeah, you could say so. I mean, it's definitely been one of the most progressed in the last, say, since the 50s, which is when Turing sort of came up with the original paper, sort of talking about machine intelligence. Yes.
Machine learning.
Yeah.
And Turing was a mathematician.
Yes, and computer scientist. Yeah.
And computer scientist who was instrumental in World War II. Is that right?
Yes.
With his kind of binary code and.
Yes, and for the Enigma breaking machine, it's in the movie. What's it called? This Imitation Game.
Yes. Yes.
So he basically built this huge computer. At the time, it's just like a room full to break the Enigma code, which was the code that the Nazis were using to send messages to each other. Yeah.
Just say very quickly into learning about the positives, you started to realize the potential risks and how.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because obviously there's a lot of potential, amazing things superhuman AI could bring to us and to the world. But then there's great power comes with great responsibility. So there's also like a lot that could go wrong. And obviously
who said that? With great power comes great responsibility.
Yeah.
Whose quote is it? Do you remember?
Wasn't it Spider-Man? Might have been.
Potentially.
I'm trying to remember, or like I think it was like a superhero movie.
Okay.
Or
not like a politician.
Could it be in Winston Churchill? I don't know.
I think
perhaps.
Maybe Churchill. Yeah.
I don't know. Some of these are muddled.
I look at it.
Yeah.
Come back to our audience.
Yeah. So basically that was sort of what propelled me into getting more involved in AI. Obviously, I went through my whole degree. I changed from computer science to sort of computer science and AI, so I could take more credits in AI. And that sort of topic was never touched upon in my whole degree. It was mostly maths and it was mostly machine learning. Again, if we try to talk about like the difference, like what do we call AI nowadays? AI nowadays is machine learning, because machine learning is the technique that we're currently using to achieve AI. So again, AI was conceived, I guess, starting from Turing, just the idea of machine intelligence. But certain approaches have already failed at getting there. So
Mhm.
AI if we try to define it, it's basically like sort of any behavior exhibited by a machine that we think is smart or intelligent,
Okay.
by our own scale. And then the machine learning is a technique. It's something that we can use to get there,
Mhm.
right? And I think in the past we did things like cybernetics and things like formal systems where a lot of it was like almost like a dictionary or like a database of rules and then using formal logic to arrive at conclusions.
Mhm.
But machine learning has very recently, I mean, since at least 2010, 2012, when we were able to harness like the power of GPUs. You know anything about GPUs? Basically, like it's if you have like a powerful machine,
Mhm.
like a computer, typically it has a GPU.
Mhm.
A lot of gamers use it, so basically it makes graphics amazing
Mhm.
and also game rendering amazing.
Okay.
And it also propelled the capacity of machine learning to do create like amazing things like achieving state of the art in certain tasks that even when I say state of the art is even better than us. There's certain tasks in vision, particularly computer vision. Let's say identifying like there's 10 classes of objects or even just the cats and dog example, just trying to identify cats and dogs. Compute, which is GPUs, we were able to get better than human results. So that was the sort of catalyst of, okay, we're actually have powerful algorithms now. Even though they're nowhere near superintelligence, the sort of things that sort of got me interested in the field, but it's already showing a lot of promise in being very useful to us in the short term. So
now, are you more excited about the changes that AI can bring for society and in advancing, obviously, technology and kind of improving people's lives and all the rest of it, or are you more worried about the potential risks of AI?
I think I'd probably be more excited than worried.
Okay.
Yeah, because at the very beginning, when like the sort of mission that I took to myself was I want to get involved in AI to do as much as possible to avoid all of the things that I'm worried about.
That can go wrong.
Exactly. And now having learned more about the field, learning more about the limitations that we currently have, and perhaps thinking more conservatively, how soon certain things will sort of come about.
Yeah.
I'm definitely more excited about
On the positive side.
more on the positive side. Yeah.
So you obviously touched on machine learning and what that is in the context of AI, but can you just elaborate on that a little bit? So for people that are not in computer science, what differentiates machine learning from other, I guess, from programming or other algorithms that you coding?
Yeah, so an easy one would be so one of the approaches before machine learning was this sort of formal logic type thing. And there you can imagine a set of rules. If A, then B, if C,
so kind of
then
like
D.
logic, essentially.
It's very heavily based on logic. And that had a lot of shortcuts.
And that is coding, essentially, isn't it? If A, then B, then...
Yeah, that was just a set of programming rules as to how to arrive to a decision. Machine learning, instead of you giving all the rules, it tries to learn the rules. And the only thing that we give it is examples of what is a good outcome and what is a bad outcome. If we try to think binary, let's say cats and dogs. So if you try to do it with a formal logic system, you would have said, okay, I'm going to try to describe the dog as much as possible. So I'm going to say if it has a nose of this shape, then it's most likely to be a dog. If it has ears of this shape, it's more likely to be... So
I'm loving this example.
Yeah. So that would be more of a formal logic type scenario. A machine learning approach would be: here is a picture of a dog, and we say it's a dog. Here's a picture of a cat, and we say it's a cat. Now you're going to see multiple of these, and
so that's the data that you're feeding it.
Yeah, we're just giving it data, images, and we're giving it a label, which is this is the dog, this is the cat, this is the dog, this is the cat. And at the very beginning, it's going to sort of predict randomly. It's going to be like, this is a dog. And then what's going to happen is we're going to say, no, it's not a dog. And it's going to take that information and learn. It's going to update itself so that next time it has a high likelihood of predicting a dog when it sees something like
Yeah.
a dog.
So it's kind of learning its
examples.
own algorithm. So we're not programming the algorithms
Exactly.
into it.
Yes, that's
yeah.
the difference. So we do
It perfects itself. Basically.
exactly. We
Okay.
program an algorithm that is self-learning, that
Mhm.
is essentially improves over time. And this particular example is, I mean, if with the labels and everything, this is what we call supervised learning. It means that we have labels to give. There's other examples, whereas, for example, unsupervised learning would be we just want to learn certain things about the structure of the data. So, you know, we don't know how many animals there are, but we want to know how many there are. So this algorithm could, for example, try to cluster them based on their properties, based on, you know, cats, based on like ear shapes, based on all sorts of different features. That's what we call features. That would be an unsupervised approach. And then one that's super popular right now is reinforcement learning, which is reinforcement learning.
Okay.
And it does take up, I mean, all of these algorithms are slightly inspired by how humans kind of trying to learn, you know, like you can imagine supervised example like, oh, I've seen something once before and I didn't know what it was, and then now I know, and then I can remember again. Reinforcement learning is less about this sort of classification, or I mean, the task, there could be multiple tasks, but reinforcement learning is more about learning a set of actions. Learning what we call a policy. So let's say like how a kid would learn to sort of ride a bicycle. It would do a lot of trial and error. And in reinforcement, it's better characterized by like say playing a game. And there's multiple, you know, you have to go from A to B, and there's multiple actions that you need to take. So at any point, you're going to make an action and we're going to give you a reward. You want to maximize that reward. So you're going to update your algorithm to assign a better, more weighting to those actions that took higher reward. For example, you have the deep mind people that they focus a lot on reinforcement learning and playing games. So one of the first sort of milestones they achieved was superhuman performance in Atari games. Basically, they managed to get superhuman performance on games like Pong, games like Breakout, using reinforcement learning. So
I see. Okay, so trying different routes and then
yeah. So imagine like you're the left player, and the left player, so the algorithm, not you, but the algorithm can control the left player. So its actions are always like go up or go down, just two actions. But in one game, it has to do that multiple times. And at the end of the game, it's gonna know, oh, have I won? Yes. Okay, so I'm gonna assign more weights to the actions that I took. Or did I lose? Okay, then I'm going to like update myself to try to do something else differently, in the next trial. So that was their first milestone. Then they did the AlphaGo milestone, which was to beat the best human in the world at the game of Go, which we thought for a long time.
The game of Go.
Yeah, it's
not golf.
It's not golf. No, considered to be probably the hardest game to beat, like from a computer. Like we knew that. I think it was Deep Blue who beat Garry Kasparov in chess, which was
Russian guy.
A Russian guy. That was
wrapping Russia head. Yeah.
It was a big milestone, but we all basically the researchers that sort of studied that case. A lot of it was, well, you know, if you're able to compute, say, a million runs at any one time as to what can happen, you know, you're obviously going to have an advantage over a human being.
Yeah.
But the AlphaGo took a bit more sort of ingenuity, sort of more like a smarter approach to being able to beat the human, because it was way more complex than chess. Yeah.
So now thinking about our day-to-day lives, obviously you kind of talked about the games and some of the learning patterns and what machine learning actually is and what differentiates it from other types of programming or coding or kind of the day-to-day things that people would do. Can you give us some examples of the day-to-day life where we are using AI or it's being, it's generating stuff for us?
Sure. I mean, the typical is a recommender system that powers your Netflix binges, you know, like if or your Amazon purchases, like whatever gets recommended. Oftentimes that is what's called a recommender system.
Yeah. And so it just learns your behavior online.
Yeah. So a typical approach to that is that basically sees your history of purchases and it compares it to other people that have also purchased the same things. And if they've purchased a new thing that you haven't, you're more likely to get that as a recommendation.
Yeah.
Because
I see. So it's looking at what other people like me are doing.
Yes.
On the internet.
It's trying to find similar.
So it kind of puts me in a category or a box.
Kind of, yeah.
Okay.
But yes, that's what it does. I mean, obviously it does more sophisticated things, but very abstractly, that's one of the approaches. It's called collaborative filtering.
And is that proven to work from a psychology perspective?
Yeah, well.
So are people more likely to actually buy the things that it's recommending or watch the things that it's recommending?
I mean, I don't know if from a psychological perspective, I would need to read studies on that, but I know that from the data perspective, it is working.
All of our social media kind of usage is highly driven by AI, right? Like, I recommend to friends. I'm just trying to think.
Well, recommending content, for example, or ads, you know, what ads to show is something that AI can do very well.
The other thing I'm thinking about is the kind of Twitter echo chamber situation where you know, if you follow a certain type of person and then you're getting more and more content on that topic or that way of thinking or certain politics, and then you kind of end up thinking that this is what everyone is talking about, this is what everyone's doing, but actually it's just created a little room for you, a little bubble for you.
No, that is definitely one of the consequences of these approaches. But the thing is, it works. Like, it does keep you engaged in this bubble, and that's what they mostly care about. And again, you know, they are trying to make these pledges about, we're going to improve these algorithms, so, you know, there's less of you being in a bubble, there's less reinforcing already present content in your feed, and more about seeing other perspectives. But currently that's just how it works. You know, it is data driven.
I guess if we focus on the positives of AI at the moment, one of the most exciting fields where AI could make a lot of difference at this moment in time, the areas of life that it could impact. So I'm thinking like healthcare, for example. You know, is there a lot that can be done with AI?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a lot of healthcare startups trying to. The problem in healthcare, I guess, is just the availability of data, because obviously the NHS would have most of the data on your health records and things like that. Other companies are certainly trying to do their own data collection. So, for example, like, you know, let's say a new approach to treating diabetes, where it's basically they give you like a smart tracker or something, and it tracks certain things in your health profile, and then it has AI to sort of say, okay, maybe you should be taking more insulin, less insulin, or when to, or
so much more accurate in terms of like what you need
things like that. I mean, the healthcare has huge potential to be disrupted by AI in a good way.
Totally.
Yeah, but again, we do need more data. That again, the kind of algorithms that we have right now are heavily reliant on the amount of data and the quality, but more importantly on I don't want to say more importantly, but they're data hungry. So and again, healthcare particularly, a lot of the data is not obscured, it's just hidden away, you know, from
because of the kind of data protection.
Yeah, data protection, yes. But I mean, I guess, okay, so DeepMind actually has, I think they have some sort of partnership with NHS. Some of the most recent, like, amazing things they've done is this prediction model on like X-rays, and they were actually beat the human X-ray like doctors, or the doctors that typically sort of identifies, I think it was tumors, might have been a lung tumor on X-rays, and actually got a model that worked better. So there we go. Yeah, but again, they have the privilege. DeepMind has the privilege of having access to a lot of like high quality data.
Because of their positioning.
Because of their positioning.
Yeah.
Yes. So that's one of, I guess, one of the issues with, up and coming startups.
Yes.
In the healthcare space. They need to collect their own data.
Again, for someone who doesn't know a huge amount about the AI industry, other than so I'm aware from my field of work that actually some of the fastest growing companies in London or in the world are using AI or in the field of AI, like all the unicorns.
Yes.
That we think about. We are currently in Old Street.
Yes.
Right, which is I mean, I don't know if I'm right to say, but like the hub or the heart of AI in London. And if you think about the startups and everything else that's kind of in and around us, is that partly why you moved to Old Street, by the way?
I mean, why did I move to Old Street? Not necessarily. I mean, the office that I used to work at is right like 7-minute walk from here.
And you work for a startup, right?
Yeah, I work for a startup as well in the AI
And so does my housemate actually, Joe, who works in fintech, and on the doorstep.
This is definitely like the place to be.
Well, you've got great neighbours, so.
Yes.
Luca's actually my neighbour, which I should have mentioned at the start of the
That's how this is happening.
Absolutely, opportunities everywhere. So my question was, would you say that most companies currently operating or kind of working in the AI industry are startups, actually?
I mean,
or is it the tech giants that are dominating the field, like Google?
I mean, if we talk about who's dominating, yes, the giants are definitely dominating because of the amount of resources they have. I mean, there's certain AI algorithms that are doing amazing things, particularly in NLP, natural language processing.
Yeah.
So one of them is OpenAI. Who's got this?
Would Alexa fall into this category?
Alexa, yes, it's both. Alexa has speech, so it needs to recognize speech. It also has to speak speech when sort of told to do so, and it has to parse that speech. Once it's so that's called automatic speech recognition. So you speak to it, it recognizes that speech, it sort of puts it in words, and then it has to make certain predictions as to what it means. And what it means, that's the NLP part.
Okay.
So basically OpenAI, who actually Elon Musk co-founded at the very beginning.
Is Elon Musk your personal hero?
I wouldn't say he's my personal hero, but he's definitely an inspiration.
Okay.
He's his drive and passion is something to be admired.
Would you say you have an AI hero? Or someone that you look at and you think, wow, they're doing really incredible things?
Do I have AI heroes? I admire, I do admire multiple people almost equally. I mean, you'd have to, Turing was brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant person and that made a lot of this, or gave directions as to how to get to places. I do believe with enough time, a lot of the science, that's how science works. With enough time, we would have gotten somewhere. But he did do a lot of things to get us there faster.
He was the pioneer.
Yeah.
Would you say he was the pioneer of AI?
Probably, yeah.
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 Cool.
Before him, Ada Lovelace was a huge influence. Then Turing did set a lot of things in motion. You also have people like Geoffrey Hinton, Jan LeCun, and Schmidhuber, who also is to be credited with a lot of amazing work. I don't have a single person who I'm
in love with.
In love with, yeah.
AI in love with.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Okay. So.
But just to go back to the point with the NLP thing, so just to give an example as to why these people are dominating, why tech giants are not dominating, is that the algorithms, the sophistication of these algorithms is very dependent on the data and the amount of resources.
Yes.
When I say amount of resources, I'm talking about data centers that can compute things things that a startup couldn't do, or a random person with a computer, just things that you couldn't imagine. So one of them is this model called GPT-3. This is a natural language model that is currently, so it was done by OpenAI, and we're talking about just so many resources took to, and we're talking about millions of dollars worth of just to create one model.
Okay.
Millions and millions of
So
dollars.
input, yeah.
Yeah, in order to pay for all of the compute necessary and all of the data that they scour the whole of internet, putting things together.
Okay.
And things that this thing can do at the very beginning, they had this really nice toy example where you can start a story, fill in like another like 3, 4, 5 more paragraphs, and it
Makes sense.
made sense.
Okay.
So
it was able to storytell.
yes. So that's one of the things that it could do. It can also.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, it can do other like a whole host of other things. I mean, one of the most interesting one recently, somebody basically managed to because this is an API now, so this is available for people to sort of experiment with. Somebody basically wrote this program to take in a description of like a web page or like components of a web page, and it outputted the code to render that.
Wow.
So it's now also like sort of outputting code.
So it is able to look at the product of that code and say what was the code behind it. Is that right?
No, so it's more like, okay, so imagine a website has buttons and all that stuff. I can describe like I want a button that has it's blue, has a border radius and this and that, just in words. I can describe it, and it would output the code, the programming code to make that.
To recreate that page.
Yes.
Okay.
Or that button.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. So I've got 2 questions that are coming out of this conversation. One that you touched on around, essentially, your output is only as good as your input, right? And that rule remains true for AI. So if you've got data that's not complete, which most data sets aren't, then as accurate as your algorithm becomes, it still will have faults if you give it biased data. So kind of talking about the bias in AI. And the other question, so we'll get onto that in a minute. The other question I had as you were talking about the pioneers of AI and people that were kind of making the difference is when we think about an AI like company or team that's working on something, I imagine a lot of these people are computer scientists, obviously super technical, really understand like the code that's going on behind it and the algorithms. But do we think that we need more psychologists and philosophers and people of other backgrounds and industries working in AI to make it sort of more inclusive, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely agree with that. I mean, we definitely need more philosophers because, I think ethics of AI is a huge field. I definitely think more people should be thinking about these questions because, again, like, we like researchers are not educated in philosophy most like they can be in their own time, but
we can't expect them to.
We can't expect them to have the sort of hindsight to think about whether this is going to cause a massive disruption in some other basically certain considerations that a philosopher would take, like is this a good thing, is this should we do this, should we not do this, as opposed to
this might be more effective, but is it actually good for humanity?
As opposed to like, can we do this? That's what the researchers do.
Because I feel like if you are a scientist and you are like super technical, then you're driven by that. I want to solve the next problem. I want to make it smarter, better, more effective, quicker. But actually, that's part of the danger of it as well, and the risk, isn't it? If we don't consider the human values as we go along. So I watched the podcast, so Joe Rogan with Elon Musk, where Elon Musk was talking about some of the risks of AI as he sees them, because obviously he's got the ability to kind of almost like look into the future, right? He's a visionary and he's able to see how it can irreversibly change humankind, which is quite scary. And when I think about AI and like all the developments that we've had, obviously I don't like go about my day thinking about the risks of AI or even how it's impacted me, just something that I want to get to at the end of this podcast as well. But it seems like something like a field that we can't stop. It just keeps moving and progressing so fast. Like it's irreversible. We're not going to suddenly say, right, we're not going to do this anymore because actually we've decided it's bad for people's mental health or whatever, the impact that it's having. But
I mean, there's definitely certain things that we can reverse. We can definitely make actions towards perhaps alleviating those, like solving the issues that is caused in the first place. I think when Elon Musk talks about the irreversible risks that AI can pose is more about the long-term consequences. So he's talking
Yeah.
more, his the way he frames it is, well, in the past, we created fire and then we created fire extinguishers when, houses started to burn down.
Sure.
So we used to be reactive in the past.
Yes.
But when it comes to super intelligent AI,
Mm-hmm.
highlighted by the works of Nick Bostrom, Alicia Yudkowsky, and Stuart Russell and these kinds of people, there is a point of no return.
Is
once,
there? Okay.
Yes, when it comes to the idea of super intelligent AI, it will be a point that we cannot go back. That's what he means by irreversible. So we need to be proactive. We need to spend more resources into thinking about how we can avoid a terrible situation once we get to that. Once we get to super intelligent AI. But a lot of the current issues are solvable, I think. Yeah.
Okay. So how far are we now from super intelligent AI?
I mean,
very hard to say.
It is very hard to say. I think most people are 70% confident it will happen in the next 100 to 150 years.
Okay. Much longer than I thought.
Yeah. So I think about 20% people think it's gonna happen in the next 50 years.
Okay.
Or less, 20% or less in the next 50 years. The thing is really hard to predict, and this is something that Ray Kurzweil he highlights as well because of the exponential rate of progress in particularly computer science. It's a point of debate in the field. A lot of there are the people are most conservative, saying it might never happen or will happen in a very distant future. Then there's a lot of people that are like, if there's some non-zero probability of happening in the next 100 years, we should still, and it has such potential for destroying humanity, then we should still work on it. We should still be, we should still be
proactive.
Proactive. Yeah.
So let's talk about some of the potential risks of, well, not potential risks of AI now. So, in the current state of affairs, what do you think are the biggest risks to humanity, or perhaps not humanity, but an individual?
Well, I mean, the bias in AI, it's a big one, and I mean, I get the thing that is most applicable right now is probably the bubble thing that you said, because that's actually something that we're starting to see.
The bubble.
The bubble, being in a going on
the
Twitter,
echo
echo chamber, being on Twitter.
I'm thinking COVID bubbles. Also problematic.
Yeah, also very problematic. But I'm not talking about, because when we think about the short-term consequences, and if I were to talk about bias in AI, I can give the example of a judge who was using AI to basically figure out how much a person should be sentenced, right? And that's not and yes, it was found to be racially biased. It would give a harsher sentence to somebody like a person of color than a white person, for example.
Yes. Yeah. Which is massively problematic.
Of course it is, but it's not something that's being implemented on a wide scale right now. And it's something that we're still working toward. That would and that also applies to something like applying for a loan, and then they also using, instead of a credit scoring, the usual thing, they might have a very sophisticated AI algorithm, but that is biased, and thus it can be very problematic to use. So it's not something that is yet applied at such a wide scale to say this is the current problem that we're facing, as opposed to, for example, the bubble thing, which is obvious. I mean, there's some things popping up here and there. So Twitter, there was a recent thread. People were posting a picture of a white man at the very top and a black man at the very bottom.
Okay.
With a lot of black in between, so just those pictures very far apart, so that if once he created a thumbnail, so the thing that the picture that you see when you see the Twitter post before you click on the image, just to see what's showed in the thumbnail. And it turned out that regardless of whether you put the white man and the black man in at the top or at the bottom, it would still show the white man, because it was biased basically. And the bias thing.
Wow.
So that was a very interesting
finding.
finding, and they obviously came out saying that we're gonna work on this, we're gonna solve this. But what it really means, like what bias in the data is, it's just a high, like oftentimes it turns out it's just a higher proportion of say white males than black males in like a particular data set, or the other way around.
Of course.
And that just means that it's more likely to predict one or the other, you know, just by the number of appearances. But there's also other factors, and those other factors are things that people are studying, people are researching how to properly unbias the data, because you want some level of bias in the data, because you want it to somewhat reflect the whatever is happening in the world.
The two problems that I've personally kind of seen or experienced with AI, one has been around definitely politics and people's political views, or any views really, and how what's the word I'm looking for, like disconnected or disparate they've become in that before. So there's actually a lot of data to suggest that like 50 years ago, if you vote Labour versus Conservatives, and you look at Conservative voters, you'll be like, right, I disagree with these people, but I don't think they're like evil or terrible people. I don't hate them. I just think we have slightly different views, and you might still be friends with them. Not suggesting that people don't, you know, but whatever. It wasn't so much of an influence on how you treated those individuals. Whereas now we've come to an age where like people's political views define them a lot more. So you might say that person's got very different political views to me. We have nothing in common. I don't think they're a good person. You know, they are potentially evil because they're propagating this type of ideology or view or whatever. We know that media has impacted this. You know, the echo chambers that people find themselves in, where you're not naturally exposed necessarily to such a variety of views because of that recommended kind of content.
Because of being in the bubble.
So isn't that a massive problem for our society, in your opinion? Or do you think it's individuals' responsibility to go out of that bubble and look at different opinions? And
I definitely think people should be more informed that they are being in a bubble.
Yes.
You know, like the main problem of being in a bubble is if you don't know you're in a bubble. And understand that at least the current state of the algorithms is they're more likely, they're biased toward you staying in the bubble.
Absolutely.
And you being outside.
What the companies?
Not the algorithms specifically.
But the corporates.
Yeah, the corporates
from the fact that you're in the bubble.
Yes, exactly.
But they're ultimately influencing your worldview.
Yeah,
right?
The fact is, if they know you're in a bubble, if they can categorize you and put you in a class, they can target ads better to you. They can target content better to you. They can, all of these things. And yes, it's detrimental to some amount, particularly when it comes to the political views. How to solve that? I'm not too sure. I think we should be more conscientious about it and seek outside opinions and just acknowledge you're in a bubble in the first place. That's already like a huge step.
Yeah. So just understanding that you're being fed information that you're biased towards is a powerful move.
Yes.
Okay, interesting. The other problem I was going to present from my experience, so I just read this book called Invisible Women. It's about feminism, but it's also about the data gap in our world around like the female experience. So a lot of the time when we're making decisions, whether that's in healthcare, in politics, in companies, in education, we are basing that on the male experience because first of all, men are in the decision making positions. So they naturally don't have access to female experience because they are men. So unless they ask women and they kind of include that data, then we get to a result that's more inclusive and even. But the writer of this book provides so many incredible examples in daily life where we don't think there's a bias, but actually there still is, like in so many areas. And actually she talks specifically about algorithms and AI and the detrimental impact of that. So for example, I work in the recruitment industry, and obviously tech's getting really smart around recruitment, filtering out CVs, filtering out individuals. And one example is looking at coders and developers and recruitment of such individuals, right? So companies will employ algorithms that will look at the skill sets, the experience they're bringing, but also how they spend their free time. And something that you can do is look at how much time you spend on certain platforms or websites, which would show passion and interest in the field. and they would use that to decide who should get the job. So, for example, if you're a female with exactly the same professional experience and the same academic qualifications, but you haven't spent as much time on certain platforms, they'll say, well, clearly you're not as passionate or not as interested in this, in this job, in this field. Maybe you won't be as good when you're actually given the job. And so they end up recruiting more males because of that. And actually, when you drill down to why that's happening, what you find is that women, well, this is quite controversial, but like, they have more caring responsibilities and they simply don't have as much time outside of their work. So especially when they're mothers and they're married, they spend more time caring for the kids, they spend more time caring for the elderly, doing a lot of that kind of housework and other work. So in terms of that leisure time where you just pursue your interests, women actually have a lot less time to do that. Does that mean they're less good at coding, or does that mean that naturally they should play a slightly different role? And what happens with the algorithm is that obviously more men get selected, and then it's like a, self-selecting kind of perpetuates the problem. So I think that's a massive issue in the data that's being fed into these algorithms.
Yeah, that certainly is.
Discuss. How do we solve this?
Well, how do we solve this? Well, the question really comes down to what algorithms are they using, because I could see a recruitment agency employing algorithms that are not necessarily machine learning based. They could be defining a set of criteria that they want, and then basically just computing, say like a score per CV, and then basically just choosing the one with the highest score. The question there is, what set of criterion are they looking for? And if their set of criterion is they want people that are spending their free time, on Stack Overflow answering questions, or just more involved in the programming, or like contributing to open source, things like that, basically in charge of designing those algorithms, was presented with a case for why they should assign more weight to if like to the female feature in the algorithm. You said they have less free time, thus what they should be doing is, if it's female, it would be like an if clause. If it's female, assign a higher weighting to the score and less to the free time.
Fine.
Right?
So you think the problem is not in using the algorithm, but it's in how the algorithm is built to account.
There's all of these sets of criteria that kind of make it hard for me to make a case for using machine learning. But I mean, just from a data perspective, maybe they do have heaps of data and then they can extrapolate those things, but still, you would have to counterbalance the device. I mean, just the fact that there are less women in tech is enough of a bias in the data set that it will always assign less probability of a woman to suggest to get into a role.
Totally. But couldn't that be an example of a situation where you might say, in recruitment for this particular industry, we can't use machine learning because we know the data is so biased, we can never feed that data into it. So we need to use human judgment.
Exactly. Or again, there is research to working on how to debias the data in a very effective way.
The other question I had for you is about the companionship robots and like that kind of whole area and field, because that kind of takes us into, I guess, emotional intelligence, and can AI actually recreate that, and what does that look like at the moment? So tell us more about the field, like what's currently happening within that.
Yeah, I mean, so the interesting things that are happening, well, for what I mean, I guess the most prevalent right now, that are not necessarily companionship, but we already see integrated in our lives, is like the usual smart home assistants. You have Alexa. The company that I work for actually used to create a smart home assistant that was more geared toward the emotional intelligence side of things. So trying to learn from you, using a lot of machine learning to learn when you're like in certain feeling better, feeling worse, or just how to address you, how to speak
like
to
your
you.
mood and how to
Exactly.
Wow.
And that brings us a bit closer to the human companion, because again, Alexa still and Google Home still feel a bit more like a device,
robotic, for sure.
as opposed to like somebody who might gauge your emotions and maybe like talk to you differently. That sounds a bit more of a companionship type thing. Then you have there's a lot of work in companionship robots for the elderly,
Okay.
and that's a big challenge as well. Elderly people who are feeling lonely want mostly human connection. The question
Yeah.
is, uh, it sounds like it's really hard to replace that, but it does. It has been shown that certain robots, like this one that's like a seal, can't remember the name, but it's basically yeah, it's supposed to like be almost like a pet, and it
Oh.
doesn't replace the experience, but
Yeah, yeah.
it makes it better. You know, it just to some extent it helps.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
So what does it do? Just moves around
it
the
just
house?
it reacts to you and it speaks to you and things like that. And, I mean,
Oh,
it's it
wow.
there's
Okay.
been
And that's being sold at the moment. You can buy
I
that.
think so, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. That's really interesting. I mean, a lot of the companionship robot conversation also is steered toward like the potential like sex robots. That's a big
That
one
is
as
interesting.
well, and like the ethics that come with that as well. Like an interesting thing to sort of start debating now. The typical robots that you would see in movies, perhaps the ones that like move around your house and kind of like do chores and things like that. Like we're not there yet. There's a lot of
Yeah.
there's a lot of like competitions in AI that sort of hit like a lot of companies building humanoid robots
Mm-hmm.
to sort of move around very well and things like that because
Yeah.
we're not there yet.
Spatially aware.
Yeah, just being spatially aware
Mm-hmm.
and dexterity, that's a big one as well. Like they just don't have like the right um, control of their fingers to do, for example, like a
Mm-hmm.
Rubik's Cube. They are now, like there's
Wow.
OpenAI
Okay.
has been working on a really good version of this,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not something that you can, for example, buy or have around, or it's not
Mm-hmm.
something that yet that has been integrated into a fully fledged robot that moves around and also can
Yeah, yeah.
do Rubik's cubes. But it's where we're sort
Yeah.
of getting at, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's also going to be very interesting.
So I'm just thinking, obviously it's easy to see, like when you were talking about the game Go and how a computer can compute so many more possible outcomes for every single step that you take, like in chess. It's very easy to see how that can be cleverer than a human being in that
Yeah.
sense. So like, sure, that's fine. You can get beaten by that in a game, no problem. But like that emotional intelligence aspect and the kind of aspect of to having that flexibility to respond to the
Yeah.
situation. Surely we're not there yet at all in terms of
No,
AI.
no, I mean definitely not. A lot of people in the psychology space and well, the merging the sort of psychology, philosophy, and AI are
Mm-hmm.
thinking about these questions. And I think Kate Darling is one of them who writes about
Interesting
this.
that it's a woman.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, I just know that like some of the things that they're talking about now is how do we address robots.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, like if say you get your kid a robot dog,
Mm-hmm.
and you observe him or her play like with the dog, how are they treating them?
Mm-hmm.
Are they like treat them as if it was a dog, or are they treat it,
As if
or
it's just a piece of
yeah, just a
yeah.
piece of metal, and
Yeah,
or
yeah.
like how do they address Alexa? Like,
Yeah, yeah,
are they saying, "Hey Alexa, could you please," or are they just saying, "Alexa, I want this," or
yeah. Yeah,
just
yeah, 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 that's true.
basically,
Yeah.
the question there is, want even though we're talking to robots, even though we're dealing with robots, do we want to still try to incentivize this addressing as if it was a person,
Mm-hmm.
addressing, because it plays with your own psychology.
Isn't that really dangerous? Again, that's the bit where like, do we want AI to get so good that you can form an attachment to it? Like if it's a pet or whatever, someone that's around the house like helping, and you can talk to them and they can read your emotions and read your moods and be quite supportive maybe in the way that a human being can't be because they don't have any feelings of their own.
Yeah.
Um, and then you get attached. Isn't that highly problematic?
Why would it be?
Because I mean, it obviously feels very unnatural to me having not been in that world, but you're attached to a machine. So you're kind of formed a connection with someone that feels real but is not real because actually they have no real feelings towards you.
But is that important for your well-being? So like if by you having this attachment to a robot, like let's say you are alone, a person, you know, your don't have a partner and you're lonely and you have suddenly
I can
have this
imagine that.
companionship robot that's
Yeah.
just around the house and you're having
Yeah.
a conversation and you know, I think there's ways to address things like depression, etc.
Of course.
Using, you know,
Yeah.
the question is, if it does improve your well-being, does it matter whether it has feelings or not?
That's interesting, and I would say, you know, especially you mentioned the elderly and people that genuinely have no other options, right? Like it's either you live on your own and you're very lonely and you have no interaction, or you have this thing that is constantly there with you and whatever, making you feel better. Sounds great. Now, what about a situation where, um, you know, you maybe haven't had a good human connection for a while, and then you've got this perfect robot that's super supportive, present, always there, never tired, never has problems of their own that you need to talk about, you know, the kind of give and take that you'd have in a human relationship.
Yeah.
And then you fall in love. You actually fully fall in love with this robot
like
thing.
Her,
Like it also, like what?
the movie Her.
Oh, I haven't actually seen the movie.
Yeah,
Is that what happens?
yeah, basically.
Yeah. I mean, there's actually a couple. I'm just thinking there's a couple of movies similarly that I've
Yeah.
seen around this. Just we're not the first people to be discussing
Yeah.
this. But my question is, say that becomes a reality, then a human connection would never like live up to what you've got there with that robot potentially.
Yeah.
So if you did have an option, say you were a young person that was just going through a period of depression, and that's like cool, that's a quick solution for you. You don't want to see any human beings, but this thing's like totally there for you. Then you never want to come out of that. So you like live in that fantasy world with your, I don't know, relationship with that machine, like a full-on relationship,
Yeah.
and then kind of trying to interact with human beings just feels, you know, like a lot of work and kind of not worth it. Isn't that problematic?
It can definitely be problematic on an instance on a case by case basis, but I would have to be a bit more utilitarian in this case and say that like if it solves a lot more problems than it causes, perhaps it's something that, you know, we may want to. I mean, I think there can be work toward ensuring that happens as little as possible, you know. Um,
Yeah.
But like the question is like, what is the trade-off? You know, what are we gaining from having something like companionship robots versus, and it's the same issue of like, you know, the Facebook or like the social media AI grabbing attention. What's the trade-off between you getting the products that you want or the conversation that you want and all of these things versus you know the things that you lose,
becoming addicted,
addicted and losing on, you know, like a more
authentic,
more varied sort of like experience.
Yeah. I don't know. I just can imagine. Again, this from a film that I saw where people basically were having sex with each other virtually as opposed to in real life, because they were like, well, actually, like having real life sex is kind of dirty and not hygienic, and if you can do it in other ways, but you're both entered into this virtual experience and it's still shared, but you're not actually like touching each other. You know, why would you ever go back to like the old ways of having sex?
Well, I mean, perhaps,
and that's like a realistic, you know, that's a
sure, but I mean, at that point,
and the consequence of that is that people are not procreating potentially.
Okay, yeah, that could be, but what if the question is if, yeah, but I mean, people are procreating nowadays when they more often than not when they choose to, right? The question there is if suddenly virtual sex was, say, 10x better than regular sex, is, you know, why not just do virtual sex most of the time, and when you do want to procreate, do it normally? Yeah. Like I don't see like a huge issue with that.
I see what you mean. Yeah. Yeah, okay. It just, I guess it depends on, because these options were never available to us. So suddenly, if they do become available, the question is, how do they change the rest of your behavior?
Yes.
You know, how do they diminish your other desires? Because at the moment, you're like, in order to do X, I need to do Y, and that's like, so I need to get involved in this whole physical thing.
But I feel
which may more naturally lead to maybe we should have kids, you know. Whereas if you never need to do that, then maybe that question just doesn't come up anymore. And the potential impact of that is like humanity slowly dying out, right? I know we've got an overpopulated world. I appreciate that.
I mean, it's definitely an interesting problem, and more often than not, we might just need the data to make any reasonable conclusions as to, you know, what's the harm that's being done. And
so you're saying just go for it, give it a go, and then figure out if there's a problem.
I mean, with certain things, like for example, virtual sex or like with companionship robots, I wouldn't say the same thing about super intelligent AI or like something that is clearly something that we need to be
Cautious of.
cautious of. But again, even though I'm saying, oh, go for it with companionship robots, like this is under the understanding that like people like very smart people in the psychology space and in the AI space already have an idea of they can already sort of intuit what's going to happen at some level, but we really need to gather a bit of data to sort of be like, oh, this is heading in this direction as opposed to this one, and then maybe there are some fires to put out, but the question is, are we better off in the end?
Yeah, no, very good, very very good point. Instinctively, I feel no. I feel like there's I would be very sad if that human connection could be, more or less easily replaced. But then I don't know why I feel sad about it. There's part of me that's like, oh, this is natural and authentic and kind of dealing with the human condition.
Definitely. But that's because that's what we're used to. That's what we've done our whole lives, and that's what we've done since inception.
Well,
but we don't know how things are going to change in the future, and even now, like we're growing more and more isolated. And
we are.
And if something worse than COVID were to come through, and suddenly your best chance at life is to remain isolated, then
oh God.
then something like virtual sex or virtual companionship sounds like a pretty good
option.
Pretty good option, yeah.
Well, this is actually, sorry, just so I've got two more questions. That's what I've got for today. One is around, like isolation of human beings. There's a lot of data, like to say children growing up, are spending lots of time on their screens and their computers. They're socializing less, they're going out less, they're playing less sport, they're like physically less active because they don't need to leave the house so much because there's so much stimulation in the house.
Yes.
That's not positive for them. Doing a little bit of screen time, being good with computers, sure, great, that's really helpful, but spending lots and lots of time on it at what cost, and exactly as you say, what does that replace? So that's already been proven to actually cause more depression, more anxiety, less learned real life behavior, real life interaction. So it's already negative,
No, I agree. Like when I look at that, I feel very happy that I actually only got to the internet past the time that I was already playing football in the streets, or like I was just going out and
build some real life friendships as opposed to virtual friendships.
Yeah, like I definitely think that is a huge negative. But the thing is though, the negatives arose because of this rapid pace in technology without the equivalent amount of pace in knowing about the consequences and more about the psychology of what could entail. And now we can reflect on it because we've got the data of the amount of like suicides that are happening, and a lot of depression, a lot of like anxiety, and I mean I'm just quoting this from like Calling of the American Mind by Jonathan Haidt, who talks
about. Did you read that?
Yeah.
So did I.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it doesn't pinpoint everything on this technology thing.
No,
but this rise in anxiety and depression in teenagers and children coming Gen Z happening as alongside with this rapid pace in in like online presence and things like that. So I definitely think it's a big negative, but I think what we need perhaps is just being more informed, more like perhaps better parenting strategies around screen time.
Yeah. Okay, so this takes us nicely on to my last question, which is, what do you think from your knowledge and experience in this are the risks that we can look out for ourselves? So like, would you say you've noticed anything about your own lifestyle or life where you were sort of feeling a bit addicted to certain things, or you were kind of relying too much on AI, or has it been mostly positive for you?
Well, for me it has been mostly positive again, and this is because like as I said, a lot of these ethical issues and this impact in AI, it's for the most part potential, because right now it's only been in small parts of our lives that AI has really sort of being present,
Yeah.
you know, and
Yeah.
smart home assistants in online like social media and like recommender systems. I don't find that like I can speak for the negatives with this like just technology in general as opposed to just AI specific
Got it.
because
Yeah.
it hasn't had yet like a full blown impact. I mean, in my life, it has just by the fact that I'm working on, it obviously has like this academic and presence in my life because that's what I do. But it's not negative in the similar sense that, or like the sense that you're sort of looking for. Um, yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah. I watched The Social Dilemma, which wasn't specifically about AI, but it was about the presence of technology and how we are connected and how we sort of gain information in today's world. And it did make me very aware of the boxes that I put other people into, based on like the kind of stream of information that I'm consuming and all the rest of it. So it's back. Yes, it's made me very conscious of my own screen time, definitely. The types of social media that I'm using, the types of apps that I'm allowing to track my like lifestyle and all that kind of stuff, just kind of not giving too much away. And then actually I think for me it's really reiterated the fact that it is about the real life human connection. That brings the most joy and happiness and like is reducing depression and that kind of thing. So I'm personally quite concerned about going down the route of we interact virtually, and that's the norm. I think that's very damaging.
Yeah, I agree, but sounds like it's gonna have to be the way to go for at least for now. Like
unless you meet outside.
unless you meet outside.
Yes, which is encouraged anyway. People should go outside more, right?
Yeah, definitely get a bit more vitamin D. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks so much, Luca.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
And
really enjoyed this.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I guess as you continue your career in AI and new things come up, it'd be great to have you again.
Yeah.
To talk about what's next.